Here we are in the middle of a New England winter. A brutal time, tough to get around, boring cars to drive. It's just a terrible thing. I mean, after spending a decade in Southern California, I thought, how can I possibly come back home to the Northeast and have to live through the dreariness of a driving winter? Well, that's one of the reasons why we started this little winter driving series here on the Audrain Museum Network to show that driving in the winter doesn't have to be boring and routine and dull. There are some great, exciting cars that you can go out with and have a good time and still be able to get where you go anywhere during the winter. Now, as you can see, this is a really tough winter day here in Rhode Island. The sun is shining, the sky is clear, the ground is dry, and it's 54 degrees. Brutal. Not really. So instead of celebrating what we might be able to do on a winter day in a fun car, why don't we celebrate the imminent arrival of spring in a car that's got enough green in its design to certainly think of renewal and rebirth of spring. This is a 2015 Bentley Continental GT3-R. Now, this is the kind of car that can sharply divide even the best of friends. One of my best friends owns one of these cars, and he loves it. He's really proud of it. It was always his dream car from the moment it was introduced, and he always started looking for one. And I said, well, it's a great car. Certainly the Bentley Continental GT is a beautiful design, and the performance that this car has, 572 horsepower, 592 on demand, and the heritage that it has from being the street homologation version of the GT3 race car gives it a certain appeal, obviously. But I couldn't wrap my head around a Bentley coupe with stripes on the fenders. I thought stripes on the fenders, Ford Focus, maybe. Bentley GT, not so much. And so we had this little discussion going back and forth, and I just said, I just don't see it. But in any event, the proof, as they say, is not in the stripes on the outside. It's what's under the loud pedal inside. And this is, by any standard, a fantastic car. So, Dave, you are right. But it is an interesting point. Does this car really say what Bentley means it to say, or does it give an entirely different message? Well, I guess it depends on how you think of Bentley as a brand. Of course, Bentley is all about racing. And the fact that Bentley is back in racing, especially with a GT car like this, which really brings us back to the halcyon days of the establishment of Bentley. The Bentley cars that the Bentley boys drove in those great races in the 1920s were just like the cars that you could go into the Bentley showroom and buy. So this is much closer to those cars, the cars that made the Bentley name, than any of the sort of cushy, very luxurious Rolls Royces with a flying bee on them that were manufactured for decades. So, okay, so we'll say for this is a much closer to the Bentley ethos than some of the other cars that have been produced under this badge. Now, today it is very fashionable to wear performance in a very visual way. This Bentley certainly does wear its performance in a very visual way. The interior is absolutely packed full of carbon fiber. Now, of course, part of that is weight saving. Instead of having wood trim, you've got carbon fiber. And this GT3-R doesn't have the back seat that the normal Bentley GT has, so that saves some weight. It's got these flat carbon fiber panel doors, not luxurious leather trim doors, but there's enough exposed stitching and contrast leather to remind you that this is not an all-out race car. Now, the exhaust note, of course, says quite otherwise. Like any proper sporting GT car, this GT3-R has a sport mode, a comfort mode. You can adjust the shocks from sport to comfort. I've got it in full sport mode, and the ride is still quite comfortable. It also helps that these seats are very supportive and comfortable. I've got the traction control on. I don't think that there's an opportunity here around these streets to actually have enough fun with the traction control off to make it worthwhile. But the car is actually really interesting, and the reason why we chose it for our winter driving series is the fact that it is, unlike the GT3-R race car, which is rear-wheel drive, this is, like all the other Bentley Continental GTs, all-wheel drive. So you have the capability of all-weather driving, obviously with the proper tires, but also it is the way that this car delivers its power, and this is what makes the real difference. I think that the engineers that design some of these all-wheel drive sports GT cars have really gotten, as the Brits would say, their sums right, because they're so much more usable than some of the cars in the category just above, the near hypercars or supercars for the street with their 1,000 horsepower, 1,200 horsepower that you don't get to use any of. Quite typical of cars of this type, it's got that programmed in burble on the overrun, which is really entertaining to hear. It's also quite interesting when the car's in manual mode and it indicates preferred upshifts. But only when you're in traffic. When you're out on an open, clear road, it'll let you go as far as you want to. But interestingly enough, the 8-speed automatic will not let you shift to a gear too high, so it won't let the engine balk. And this has got great binders, carbon ceramic brakes, and they also seem to act more effectively when cool. Well, it's not cold today, but certainly when cool than some of the others on cars of this performance type. It wants to leap forward on this nice dry road. But again, as I said, with proper winter tires, the way this delivers power from the lowest part of the range all the way up make it a car that's really easy to drive if you had to drive it in bad weather, which is not always the case, obviously, for a GT car that can produce up to 600 horsepower. This is the kind of car that you want to find a nice ocean road like this one and just let it have its head. It's getting warmer and warmer here, outside and inside. And I think this car is a great summer companion too, but that's another story. The controls are also really great. The adjustability of the steering column for height, for distance, it's really terrific and really makes for a very, very usable car. And again, it has that almost strange duality of extreme comfort and quietness, and yet this raw edge. I can see why the owners of these cars, and they only made 99 for the US market, each one numbered. This one is number 42 for the US market. Really think these cars are quite something, and I'm a big fan of the GT3 series. It was devised in order to give amateur drivers a bridge between amateur driving the single marque series like the Ferrari Challenge or the Porsche Cup and professional series. But also, to me, I think it gives the spectator, the fan, the enthusiast, a way to enjoy racing with cars that they can see and recognize and relate to. And that, to me, is the core of it all. The whole silhouette thing just sort of leaves me slightly cold. And this, to me, is the core of automotive enthusiasm in a sporting way. I keep hoping for the great rebirth of GT racing, and maybe we're on the cusp of that again with the new hypercar series at the FIA, but I think that it's really worth going after and supporting the GT3 racing, because it really relates to those things that mean something to us as a driver, and also makes the manufacturers deliver product that actually deliver on the road and in the track. Even if the GT3-R race car is actually a rear-wheel drive car, that, by the way, weighs 2,000 pounds less than this car, which weighs 200 pounds less than the standard Continental GT, it still is related to what it is I'm driving now, and that really means something. And I think that it's truly a testament and salute to W.O. Bentley and the Bentley boys. Even on this wonderful drive, I couldn't find any snow for our winter driving adventure. In my cold heart, I've got a warm spot for this Bentley GT3-R.